Alright, sorry, we got cut off in the last video. So remember, we're trying to complete the square to create a perfect square trinomial here. And so in order to get this number that creates the perfect square trinomial, you're going to need to remember this formula. You're going to take half of the b value and then square it. So remember, the b value is the number in front of x. So in this quadratic, it's 6. So what is half of 6? Half of 6 is 3. So that's what you're going to square. Now remember, squaring and multiplying by 2 are not the same thing. 3 squared is 3 times 3, which is 9. So we're going to put plus 9 here. Now we just changed the value of this equation because we added 9 to the left side of the equation. So we know the basics of equations is knowing what you do to one side, you have to do to the other. So we know we have to add 9 to this side of the equation as well to keep it balanced. But we just created a perfect square trinomial. This perfect square trinomial will factor into a binomial times itself. So we know the first terms are x because they multiply to get x squared. And what two numbers multiply to get 9 and add to get 6? They both have to be 3's. So instead of writing it as x plus 3 times x plus 3, we write it as x plus 3 squared. Then we have this plus 6, and that's equal to 0 plus 9, which is 9. Now this is almost in vertex form, but vertex form is set equal to 0, so we're going to subtract that 9 from both sides and write this as x plus 3 squared. 6 minus 9 is negative 3, so minus 3 equals 0. And so what this tells me, again, the a value is the number out here, which is the same as the a value up here, and it is an understood 1. So that tells me the parabola opens up and has the normal width of a parabola. The bigger a gets, the narrower the parabola gets. The smaller a gets, the wider or fatter it gets. The h and k values tell me the vertex of the parabola. That's that minimum or maximum point where the parabola changes directions. So just like in the equation of a circle, this subtraction in front of h tells me that the sign inside the parentheses is actually the opposite of what h is. So that plus 3 tells me h really was a negative 3, because x plus 3 is the same thing as x minus negative 3. The k value has addition, so whatever sign it has is the sign of that point. So this parabola's vertex would be the point negative 3, with the normal width opening up. And again, all that's just review of quadratics. That's not what we're actually looking at today. But that process called completing the square is going to help us take the equation of a circle that is given in general form and get it written in standard form. So remember, standard form is the one we want. That's the one that we can tell the center of the circle and its radius from. And so this is what we want it to look like, and this is what it looks like right now. So with quadratics, we only have an x in our equation. With circles, we have an x and a y. So we actually have to do that process called completing the square twice. And so I'm going to rearrange some things in this equation. I'm going to put the x squared and the x term together. So I'm going to write that as x squared plus 6x. Now I'm going to complete the square on the x's to create a perfect square trinomial here. That's what's going to get me this binomial squared. Now I'm going to write the y squared and the y together. So plus y squared plus 4y, and leave a blank there to complete the square with the y's. I want to create a perfect square trinomial here that will factor into that binomial squared. I want my constant on the other side of the equation. So I'm going to add 3 to both sides, which makes that negative 3 become positive on the other side of the equation. So we're going to do that process of completing the square, which remember is just half of b squared. We're going to do that twice, once with the x's and once with the y's. So with the x, my b is 6, just like it was up here. Half of 6 is 3, and 3 squared is 9. So we're going to put plus 9 here, and what we do to the left side, we have to do to the right side. So I'm going to write plus 9 on the other side. We're going to complete the square with the y's. My b is 4. What's half of 4? 2. What's 2 squared? 2 times 2 is 4. So this becomes 4. Now both of these are perfect square trinomials. meaning when I factor them, I'd get the same binomial times itself. That's where we're going to get the correct form of the circle. Both of these binomials are the same binomial times itself, so that binomial is squared. So remember we talked about up here, an important thing was that when we factored it into the binomial times itself, this number was always half of this number. So we'll see that here. What numbers multiply to get 9 and add to get 6? They both have to be 3's. So this becomes x plus 3. Do you see how that's simply half of that number? What numbers multiply to get 4 and add to get 4? They both have to be 2's. So this has to be y plus 2. Half of 4 is 2. Now you can't just go from here to here with the half because you have to know what you're adding on this side. And do you see I forgot to add that 4 over here? That's super important. Whatever you add here, you have to add here to keep your equation balanced. Now, one common mistake students have is they just get in a hurry and they forget the difference in the variables here, that this one should be an x and this one should be a y. Don't forget the squaring here too, and don't forget the addition between them. So remember, it should look like the standard form that you're used to in an equation. Now over here, we're going to add the 3, the 9, and the 4. 3 plus 9 is 12, plus 4 is 16. Now with the ones that we're graphing, these will always be a perfect square. So if you get something that's not a perfect square here, you probably did something wrong, because that would make that really hard to graph. So we're going to sketch the graph on the coordinate grid. So remember, HK is my center. It's the opposite of the signs here. So my center is the point -3, -2. So if we draw in our x and y axis here, it wasn't provided, so I'm going to go ahead and just sketch one in there. The point -3 would be left 3, -2 would be down 2, would be right here. Now remember, this 16 is not my radius, it's the radius squared. So my radius is the square root of 16, which is 4. And that allows me to plot 4 good points. 4 to the right, 4 up, 4 left, 1, 2, I can't count, and 4 down. And then you can either use your compass to draw a really good circle, or you can just kind of sketch one through those 4 points, would be fine as well. All right, so number 8, you can go ahead and try, if you'd like to match these equations with the correct graph here, or we can look at that together. I'm going to do this on a separate sheet of paper just to have a little more room here. But I'm going to write that first equation. So the first equation is x squared plus y squared minus 6.25 equals 0. Now I hope you notice that this is a little bit different than the equation that we just looked at with number 7. Because that equation had an x squared and an x term, a y squared and a y term. This one just has x squared and y squared, but no x and y term. So if we were completing the square, we would have to think of that as 0x and 0y. But we really don't have to do that. All we can do is just bring the 6.25 to the other side, and we already have this in our standard form. Because remember, when you have x squared plus y squared, that's the same thing as x minus 0 squared plus y minus 0 squared. So if you don't have the x and y term, that just tells you that your center is the origin. Your radius squared is the 6.25. So if you take the square root of 6.25, then you find your radius. So 625 is a perfect square, and so 6.25 is as well. So the square root of 625 is 25. So the square root of 6.25 is 2.5. So we can easily identify the graph for this equation. It has a center of 0, 0, and a radius of 2.5. It is circle E. So A would go with E. All right, so B will give us an opportunity to practice that completing the square. So I'm going to write that equation, x squared plus y squared plus 16x minus 12y plus 96 equals 0. All right, so your first step is going to be to group your x's and group your y's. So I'm going to write the x squared, then the 16x, and then remember, leave a blank. Then I'm going to write the y squared, and the y term, which is negative 12y, and leave a blank. I want my constant on the other side of the equation. So remember, you're really subtracting 96, so that positive 96 becomes negative on the other side. Now don't worry, remember this is radius squared over here and it's negative, so that doesn't really make sense. But whatever we add here, we're going to be adding over here, so that won't stay negative 96. So remember, to fill in these spots, you have to do half of b squared. So your b on your x's is 16. What is half of 16? 8. 8 squared is 8 times 8, which is 64. So I'm going to put plus 64 here and over here. I'm going to do the same thing with y's. My b is negative 12. Half of negative 12 is negative 6. But when I square negative 6 times negative 6 is positive 36. What I do here, I have to do over here. So now these are my perfect square trinomials that can factor into those binomial squares. Remember, the first one will have an x, the second will have a y. Remember, these numbers are simply half of b. Half of these numbers. Half of positive 16 is positive 8. Half of negative 12 is negative 6. So, what numbers multiply to get 64 and add to get 16? They both have to be 8s. What numbers multiply to get positive 36 but add to get negative 12? They both have to be negative 6s. Over here, we're simply going to add negative 96 plus 64 plus 36. 64 and 36 is 100. Add that to negative 96, I get 4. That's a perfect square. If you get something other than a perfect square there, you know you've done something wrong. So now I know the center of this circle. Remember, these signs lie. So my center is actually negative 8, positive 6. My radius is not 4. This is the radius squared. We take the square root of 4 and it's 2. So we're locating the circle that has a center at negative 8, 6, and a radius of 2, which is circle B. Are you getting a hang of it? Okay, so you can go ahead and match the ones with those by completing those. Of course, we're going to have some that are not used at all. So let's look at C. We'll do that together. So we have x squared plus y squared minus 16x minus 8y plus 64 equals 0. So putting my x squared and x term together and leaving a blank, my y squared and my y term together, leaving a blank, and bringing that 64 over and changing its sign. So half of b, half of negative 16 is negative 8. Negative 8 squared is positive 64. I'm going to add it over here too. My b here is negative 8. Half of negative 8 is negative 4. Negative 4 squared is positive 16. I'm going to add it over here as well. Now I'm ready to, I should have a plus right there, factor these two perfect square trinomials, the first one with an x, the second with a y. Remember, this number is simply half of b. Whatever sign b has will be your sign here. Half of negative 16 is negative 8. Negative 8 times negative 8 is positive 64. Negative 8 plus negative 8 is negative 16. Half of negative 8 is negative 4. Negative 4 times negative 4 is positive 16. Negative 4 plus negative 4 is negative 8. And what does that equal over here? Those cancel, leaving me with 16. And remember, that is a perfect square. So my center of this circle, remember these signs lie, is the point 8, 4. That's my center. My radius, this is the radius squared, is 16. So the radius is square root of 16, which is 4. So we're going to look. Do we have a point or a circle at 8, 4 with a radius of 4? 1, 2, 3, 4. Yes, that is A. All right, go ahead and practice matching up. We've already found the correct equations for circles A, B, and E. See if you can finish that up, and we'll look at that on the next video.